Close the doors, turn off the lights, because what you're about to hear now will haunt you, even in your dreams. Hello, my friends. Before we start this incredible story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, okay? And remember to like and subscribe to the channel for more intriguing stories. The narrow road wound between hills covered in dense fog, while the car's tires cut through the damp asphalt of the Dorset countryside in the English countryside. The clock read almost 4 in the afternoon, but the sky remained overcast, a greyish, melancholy tone, as if the day itself refused to fully exist. In the driver's seat, Samuel Carter gripped the steering wheel with tense hands, his jaw clenched, while his eyes scanned the landscape, fields, dense woods, and occasionally an old stone house lost on the horizon. Beside him, smiling with a serenity he could not understand, was Claire Hawthorne, his girlfriend of a year and a half, a young white woman with delicate features, heiress of one of the oldest and most influential families in the region. "You'll love my parents, Sam. They're eccentric, yes, but charming," she said, sliding her fingers over his arm. But there was something in the tone, a barely concealed hesitation, a subtle pause that, to Samuel, sounded like an echo of warning cloaked in sweetness. When the iron gates swung open automatically, they revealed a property that looked like something out of a Gothic nightmare. Hawthorne Manor. A colossal mansion built of black stone, it was flanked by twisting cypress trees and maze-like gardens. The tall, gilded windows reflected the pale light of an unseen sun, and every detail, from the gargoyles embedded in the roof to the faceless angel statues scattered throughout the grounds, seemed designed to intimidate and to watch. Samuel swallowed, feeling a tightness in his chest that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just nerves, it was instinct. When they got out of the car, they were immediately greeted by Richard and Evelyn Hawthorne, figures of an old-fashioned, almost theatrical elegance, whose smiles were too wide to be natural. Richard, a tall man with impeccably combed white hair, grey eyes, and a presence that filled any space, extended his hand to Samuel, shaking it with a strength that seemed to measure, assess, weigh. "Welcome to our humble home, Samuel," he said in a deep, velvety voice that carried both charm and something deeply hostile, though well disguised. Evelyn at his side shook his hands with cold fingers, adorned with antique rings, and a smile that did not reach his eyes. "It is a joy to have you here with us. At last." The walk into the mansion was like stepping through a portal into another time or another world. Long hallways decorated with Renaissance tapestries, paintings of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow every movement, and furniture that smelled of old wood, leather, and something else. Something that I shouldn't be there. Samuel noticed within the first few minutes that the household staff, gardeners, maids, butlers, were all black. All of them. And although their faces were dressed in formal smiles, there was absence in each of their eyes. A sharp, deep emptiness, as if something vital had been ripped out of them. During dinner, served in a room whose vaulted ceiling displayed frescoes of scenes that Samuel could not interpret. Sometimes they seemed like rituals, sometimes like sacrifices. The discomfort only grew. Polite conversations, lingering glances, questions that seemed trivial but that touched on disconcerting topics. "And tell me, Samuel," Richard began, putting down his cutlery as if beginning an informal interrogation, "do you feel attachment to your identity, to your essence?" Samuel arched his eyebrow, forcing a disconcerted smile. "Sorry, what do you mean?" Evelyn intervened, smiling. "Oh, don't worry, dear. They're just family, philosophical reflections. We have certain unconventional interests." Claire smiled tensely, squeezing Samuel's hand under the table. But at that moment, he realized, it wasn't a joke. After dinner, Richard insisted on showing them around the property. "There are certain places that hold traditions of our lineage. Their path led them to an ancient greenhouse, tucked away in the back of the mansion, shrouded in dark vines. Inside, there were no plants, just shelves filled with jars. Jars of amber liquids and eyes. Eyeballs, preserved, floating slowly, accompanied by labels, names, dates, descriptions. Samuel stepped back, feeling nausea rise, while Richard behind him smiled. Our little archive of observation. Each look carries a story, a soul, a legacy. And as if that were not enough, when they left the greenhouse, Samuel heard it. A whisper coming from the wind or from the walls themselves. A voice, scratched, desperate. That said, in a thread of sound that froze his blood. "Run! Now!" The walk back from the greenhouse to the mansion seemed longer than before, as if the ground itself had been distorted to lengthen the distance. The silence that accompanied Samuel and Claire was thick, sharp, and there was no longer room for superficial conversation or attempts to disguise the discomfort. Claire held his arm tightly, as if she wanted to both protect him and prevent him from asking questions. And despite the grip, there was an unsettling coldness in her fingers, as if something inside her was on alert or in denial. As they crossed the side garden, Samuel noticed the staff again. They were standing, simply watching, each one strategically positioned, like chess pieces. Hard smiles, fixed eyes. No one spoke, no one blinked, and that emptiness, that abyss behind the pupils, was more eloquent than any words. When they entered through the back door, Richard was already waiting for them in the hallway, his hands clasped. Behind his back, with that smile that Samuel was beginning to recognize, not as hospitality, but as a mask. "I imagine our collection of curiosities has surprised you." His voice was calm, but carried a subtle note of mockery. Before Samuel could answer, Evelyn appeared, gliding across the floor like a ghostly presence, holding a tray with 2 glasses of wine. "Relax, dear. Ashwood is intense at first, but everyone gets used to it." Claire forced a smile. "Mom, Dad, I think Sam is tired. I'm going to take him to his room." Evelyn's glance was quick, almost imperceptible, but it carried a hint of frustration, as if her daughter were breaking a carefully crafted protocol. The room, located on the 3rd floor, was as opulent as it was unsettling. A 4-poster bed with red curtains, antique mahogany furniture, and a lit fireplace that curiously didn't heat the room, as if the fire there was just decorative. On the walls, more paintings, always portraits, always the same patterns, white aristocratic men and women staring directly at whoever dared to cross that space. But upon closer inspection, Samuel noticed something that chilled his spine. In the lower corners of the frames, small marks, names, dates, and one word, hand-engraved, almost erased by time. Replaced. His chest tightened. His brain fired connections, trying to deny the conclusion that was beginning to form. But a part of him already knew, already felt. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, holding her head in her hands, breathing deeply. "Sam, I need to tell you something." Her voice was a shaky whisper, filled with suffocating guilt. He crouched in front of her, holding her knees. "What, Claire? What is all this? What's going on here?" His tone was low but firm, laced with tension that was about to boil over. She didn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking, her eyes were watering. "Listen to me. I love you. I love you, Sam. This is real. Our love is real. But my family, they're not like other people." Her breathing became ragged, as if each word was a knife to her own chest. You were chosen from the beginning. They need you, what you are, what you carry." Before he could process it, a dull sound interrupted the moment. 3 firm knocks on the door, not lingering, not impatient, precisely calculated. Claire flinched, gripping his arm so tightly it left bruises. Samuel stood, staring at the door, not moving, from the other. Sighed, Evelyn's voice sounded sweet, drawling. "Samuel, honey, is everything okay in there? We'd really like to show you the family room. It's a tradition for those who join us." For a few seconds, Samuel stood paralyzed, watching the doorknob as if it were breathing, as if at any moment it would start to move on its own. Claire held his arm, almost suffocating, silently begging him not to answer. But there was something else, a detail that Samuel noticed belatedly. Around the door, there were no shadows, none, as if the light from the fireplace, from the lamps, simply refused to touch that limit. From the other side, Evelyn's voice echoed again, this time sweeter, almost maternal, but with a subtle tone of command hidden between the lines. "Samuel, is everything okay, dear? I would really like you to come. It's important." Claire squeezed her eyes shut, as if she felt physical pain just hearing those words. Samuel, with a shaky breath, answered, without thinking, "Yes, we're coming down now." The staircase seemed longer than before. The railing, cold as metal left under the snow, guided his fingers as each step made the floorboards creak, as if the house itself claimed his presence. Claire walked beside him, visibly conflicted, her face divided between love and guilt, as if each step dragged her deeper into a nightmare she herself had helped to create. When they reached the ground floor, they were led by Richard, who had appeared, like a living shadow at the top of the hallway. "Ah, how nice of you to accept our invitation," he said, with that smile that was no longer just uncomfortable, it was predatory. Evelyn was waiting for them ahead, holding a heavy set of golden keys, leading them to a double door, ornately carved with eyes, hands, and intertwined spirals. "Here," she said, unlocking it, "is where it all begins." When the door opened, it revealed a room that, at first glance, looked like a library. Floor-to-ceiling antique wooden shelves, filled with leather-bound books, many of them without titles on the spines. But Samuel soon realized these weren't just books. They were records, archives, reports. Each shelf was meticulously organized by name, date, and ethnicity. There were specific drawers labeled Afro-descendant, Asian, Latino, European, and in the center of the room, on a black marble pedestal, a glass case protected a human brain, preserved, connected to wires, electrodes, and metal plates as if it were still functioning. Around the pedestal were photographs, black people, men and women, all smiling, all acquaintances. Samuel recognized them. They were the house staff. His stomach turned. Cold sweat trickled down the back of his neck. Evelyn stepped closer, running her fingers over the glass. "Wonderful, isn't it?" Her voice held an almost reverent tone, like someone presenting a work of art. "Consciousness is not just an abstract concept, Samuel. It is transferable, storable, adaptable." Richard finished, circling the pedestal. "What we are no longer needs to be trapped in fragile, aging, limited bodies. Our family, our bloodline, has been developing methods for centuries to preserve what truly matters: essence, consciousness, experience, and power." Samuel swallowed hard, looking at Claire, who now kept her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at him. And them," he stammered, pointing to the photos. Evelyn smiled. "Alive, all of them, but not exactly here." You mean that—" Samuel's voice faltered, but Evelyn interrupted him, sliding a finger over his lips as if calming a restless child. "Shh. Samuel, my dear, you are special. You are not here by chance. Your physical constitution, your mind, your energy are perfect. You were carefully selected, observed, evaluated. And now," she held his chin, tilting his face gently, "now you have the chance to be part of something eternal." At that moment, the lights in the room flickered. A sound, low, bass, almost a subsonic frequency, filled the room, vibrating directly in the ribs, in the temples. And then, A secret door, behind the bookcase, began slowly to open. The sound of the door sliding, creaking slowly on hidden tracks, sounded more like an organic groan than any mechanical mechanism. Samuel took a step back, holding Claire's arm, which was now shaking visibly, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if she refused to witness what she knew was about to happen. From the crack that had opened, a pulsating blue light escaped, accompanied by a metallic smell, mixed with something humid, sweet, sickening, a combination between ozone and raw flesh. Richard, smiling like a maestro before his masterpiece, made a broad gesture with his arm, inviting them to enter. "Please don't be shy. It's a rare opportunity to witness our heart." His voice seemed to reverberate off the walls, as if the space itself was vibrating in resonance. As they stepped through the door, Samuel immediately felt the air change, heavier, denser, as if every particle was saturated with memories, with presence, with awareness. The hallway that stretched ahead was not made of stone, wood, or concrete. The walls seemed organic. They pulsed gently, like muscles beneath translucent skin, thin veins branching out, through which ran a greenish liquid, illuminated from within, like liquid bioelectricity. Each step made the floor reverberate, emitting a low sound, as if they were stepping on a living, breathing chest. Claire squeezed Samuel's hand, finally looking at him, her eyes filled with terror and tears. "Forgive me, I thought that I could stop it, that I wouldn't make it this far." The corridor opened into a huge, circular chamber, the walls of which were covered in structures that looked like capsules. No, they didn't. They were translucent. Vertical capsules arranged in concentric circles from the floor to the vaulted ceiling. Inside each one, bodies, men, women, mostly black, suspended in milky liquids, eyes closed, wires connected to their temples, the back of their necks, their chests. Some were trembling, others were moving in involuntary spasms, others seemed to be smiling, but it wasn't a smile of joy. It was a rictus, a muscular distortion, the result of something that should never happen to any human being. Samuel staggered, putting his hand to his mouth, stifling a scream, while his eyes filled with tears, nausea, and terror. What is this?" His voice came out in a hoarse, broken thread. Richard, impassive, walked over to one of the capsules, caressing the glass as if touching the face of a child. "Preservation, my dear. Continuity. These people are not lost. They are foundations, essential structures. They sustain our network, our collective consciousness. Do you think we are just a family? No, we are an entity, an organism that transcends time, flesh, physical limits. Here," he reached out, turning a panel, and one of the capsules lit up, "is Marcus, the gardener. An excellent servant, strong, resilient. His body has served 3 times. Samuel's eyes widened, looking inside. It was Marcus, yes, but his face was trembling. His eyes, even closed, were letting tears flow. Evelyn approached with that sweet, wicked smile, like a black widow about to wrap her prey in the final cocoon. "Samuel, my dear, your arrival here is no accident. You were chosen for a very, very special reason. Your mind, your neurological structure, your genetic balance are perfect. You will be—" She slid her fingers over his chest, as if drawing invisible lines. "An extraordinary host. And don't worry, it won't be the end. It's a transition, and your essence will live on in us forever." At that moment, red lights began to flash on the ceiling of the chamber. The low sound returned. But now, it no longer seemed like a sound. It seemed a voice without a mouth, without an origin, that whispered, "Accept." The low sound that filled the chamber seemed to emanate not just from the walls or the floor, but from the very air, from inside his brain. Samuel pressed his temples, feeling the vibrations echo in his ribs, his vertebrae, his joints, as if he were about to be dismantled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left that resembled himself. The pulsing blue light grew in intensity, and with it, the frequency of that originless, mouthless, faceless whisper, "Accept, accept, accept." Claire clutched his arm, tears flowing uncontrollably, her lips trembling as she repeated in a barely audible voice, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." Samuel no longer knew if this was real or if his mind was beginning to crack under the weight of that presence, because it was no longer just fear, it was invasion, violation, an assault on his very consciousness. The center of the chamber, previously just an empty platform, began to open, revealing a mechanism that looked like a grotesque fusion of technology and biology. From the circular base, metal arms rose, articulating like bones covered in metal tendons, connected by wires that pulsed in sync with that thing. In the middle, a chair. Not just any chair, it was a sort of surgical throne made of dark metal, aged leather, and flesh. Yes, parts of it were living flesh. Samuel felt his stomach churn as he realized that part of the backrest was an actual spine. The straps that would hold the arms and legs pulsed slightly, as if breathing, awaiting the next victim. "Please, Samuel," Evelyn whispered, walking towards him with a sweetness that made everything even more unbearable. "Sit down. Accept your place. In us." Richard folded his hands behind his back, watching with that satisfied smile of someone witnessing the last act of a perfectly rehearsed play. "You understand, don't you, Samuel? This isn't just about survival. It's about evolution, about breaking through the grotesque barriers of matter, flesh, time, death. All of that is rudimentary. We are more than that. We are continuity." Around him, the capsules trembled slightly, as if their occupants, or what was left of them, were reacting to the approach of yet another. Samuel felt his entire body tingle, his vision blur, and for the first time he realized that something was trying to get in. It wasn't metaphorical, it wasn't psychological dread, it was a frequency. A wave that resonated directly over the architecture of his brain, searching for flaws, loopholes, pathways. A sound, a voice, that whispered directly into his innermost core. "Accept." Claire fell to her knees, holding her head, sobbing as if she were being torn apart from the inside. "Two. They started it, Sam. You have to resist for God's sake." Her voice was shaking, full of pain and guilt and despair, but Samuel could barely hear her. His eyes began to blur. Black spots appeared at the edges of his vision. The ground seemed to melt. The voices multiplied, distorted, overlapping, in languages he had never heard but somehow understood. And among them all, one, clearer, closer, older than any other, whispered, "Your body is ours, your mind, our portal." And in that instant the throne's bonds opened, slowly stretching and toward him. And it was in that millisecond, at that limit where consciousness begins to fragment, that Samuel noticed something. A different sound, tiny but clear. A ticking, fast, precise. It didn't come from the throne, nor from the capsules, nor from the voices. It came from Claire's pocket. She, on her knees, slowly opened her hand, revealing a small, square metallic object with a tiny screen where a countdown flashed. 003, 002, 001, and then a flash. The flash that exploded in the center of the chamber did not seem like an ordinary flash. It was not electric light, nor fire, nor anything that human senses were prepared to process. It was a pulse, a shock of bluish, almost liquid energy that expanded in all directions, passing through matter, flesh, and thought as if the world, for a few seconds, was made only of vibrating frequencies and condensed memory. Samuel was thrown backward, hitting one of the capsules, which cracked with a dull crack. Claire rolled on the floor, groaning, while putting her hand to her ear, trying to contain the buzzing that now seemed to come from inside her own skull. And then silence. But not a natural silence. It was an absence, a hole, a gap in sound, in light, in space itself. For a few seconds, or perhaps hours, it was impossible to tell. Everything seemed suspended, as if time had been ripped from its gears. When awareness returned, Samuel slowly opened his eyes, gasping, and realized that the lights in the chamber were off. The capsules no longer trembled. They did not pulse. The liquid inside them had darkened, becoming opaque, viscous, dead. In the center, the biotech throne was partially collapsed, its metal arms shaking in involuntary spasms, like a wounded animal on the verge of death. But that was not all. No, because amidst the darkness, something else was now breathing. It could not see. It could not hear. It could not move like flesh, but it was breathing. Richard was on his knees, hands on his face, shaking, but not from fear, from anger, from frustration. His body felt cracked. Yes, tiny cracks ran across his skin like porcelain about to shatter. Behind the fissures, Samuel saw not blood or flesh, but shadow. A dark, dense matter that seemed to be pulsing, trying to get out, to breathe on its own. Evelyn lay next to him, panting, holding her head as if struggling to keep. Something inside. Something that was pushing, pressing against the confines of her body. And it was in that instant that Samuel realized, with growing horror, that that thing, that entity, was not the family. It was what was in the family. Something that wore flesh, like clothing. Something old, previous, extra-human. Claire crawled toward him, holding her face, shaking, tears and blood streaming from her nose. "Sam, listen, it's not over. No, it's not over." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. It just shut down the matrix, the secondary source. They're still in you. They started coming in when you heard that sound, that calling. Samuel clutched his head, groaning because, yes, she was right. He could feel it, deep in the back of his neck, at the base of his spine, a tingling that wasn't physical. It was structural, a shift, an invasion. Something was crawling, climbing, probing his synapses as if his mind was now an open field. Suddenly a new sound cut through the air. It wasn't coming from the machines, or the capsules, or the agonizing bodies of Richard and Evelyn. It was coming from above, from the ceiling. Panels began to slide open, revealing a hidden structure, iron bars like cages, or like an observation platform. And there, people, men, women, white people, in suits, in dresses, watching, observing, smiling. Samuel recognized it immediately. They weren't family. They were investors, financiers, clients, an entire network. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And in the center, a woman with platinum hair holding an old microphone activated the sound. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't worry. It's just a small technical hiccup. The ceremony continues." And then the red lights came on. The entire floor began to open up. The metallic sound reverberated, like an ancient gear awakening from a deep sleep. The floor plates slowly separated, revealing a gap, an abyss. From within it, a cold vapor rose, laden with an indescribable smell, an impossible mix of oxidized metal, damp flesh, and an acidic touch, almost like ozone, that made the eyes burn and the lungs suffocate. Samuel, holding Claire, stepped back as he tried to comprehend what he saw. Below, there was not only darkness, there was movement. Something down there was breathing, writhing, pulsing. Organic structures, tubes, veins, flesh braided with metal. A living, gigantic network that extended far beyond the mansion, the estate, perhaps for miles, perhaps in every direction. The woman at the top of the platform, holding the microphone, didn't seem the least bit shaken. Her eyes shone with an almost transcendental serenity, as if she were observing not a problem, but a process. Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness an update in the Matrix, a new stage, an evolution that, transcends any biological limitation. Her voice was silky, intoxicating, as if each syllable carried an embedded command. The other observers, businessmen, politicians, investors, applauded, smiling, clinking crystal glasses. It was an audience, a spectacle, a carefully planned ceremony where Samuel was not invited. He was the centerpiece, the product, the sacrifice. Richard, kneeling, was still struggling against the fissures that were spreading across his body. The liquid shadow that was leaking through the cracks was already beginning to form. Something. Thin. Tentacles, deformed arms that stretched across the floor, trying to grab onto anything or someone. Evelyn, on the other hand, seemed less affected physically, but her eyes, her eyes, were no longer human eyes. They were black spheres, completely filled with a viscous substance that reflected the light in an impossible way, as if inside, in the depths of that gaze, there was a night sky, a cosmos, a portal, and she smiled, not as a mother, not as a villain, but as a priestess. Samuel, don't you understand? This body, this shell is irrelevant. We are that, and she pointed to the abyss that was opening up. Claire held Samuel's face in both hands, trembling, panting, tears streaming down her face. Sam, look at me, look. Now is the time. Now is the only chance. Her voice was cracking, but there was a conviction in it that Samuel had never seen before. I lied. I omitted. But I prepared. A way out. Only one. And it's there. Down there. At the core. At the root of this. It's the only thing that can turn everything off, not just here, everything. Samuel's eyes widened, feeling his chest tighten. Are you telling me that to get out of here, we have to go in? The ground shook, the bars began to retract, platforms appeared, forming a sort of ramp that slowly descended, straight into the belly of the thing. The woman on the microphone smiled, tilting her head. Perfect. They accepted. Her voice was full of satisfaction, like someone watching a chess piece fall exactly where it was planned. And then, with no more options, with no more time, Samuel took Claire by the hand and took the first step towards the abyss. The metal ramp creaked beneath their feet, curved like a steel intestine spiraling downward, taking Samuel and Claire deeper into the belly of that thing. With each step, the smell grew stronger, thicker, more impossible. It was like breathing inside a rotting womb, where metal, flesh, and something indefinable, perhaps the very concept of existence, mingled in a viscous, living, conscious soup. The walls pulsed, breathed, vibrated, and for moments Samuel swore they watched, not with eyes, but with a perception that didn't depend on organs. It was like being seen from the inside, through layers, through everything you are, and everything you try to hide even from yourself. As they descended, figures began to appear, trapped in the walls, not whole. Fragments, half-formed faces, sewn-together mouths, eyes that suddenly opened, staring at them, begging for something that not even they could name. Arms that stretched out, not to grab, but in supplication. Bodies half embodied in the organic fabric of the structures, pulsing to the rhythm of the living thing that inhabited that abyss. Sam, Claire whispered, her voice breaking. They are the ones that didn't work. The failures. The rejections. She held his hand. Tighter, as if squeezing him was the only possible anchor against the madness that spread in all directions. Down below, a light, not white, not blue, black, a light that did not illuminate, that did not cast shadows, that did not reflect. It was absence, an optical hole in space, and in the center, a structure impossible to be immediately understood. A cluster of thick veins, cables, nerves, bones, metal panels, gears, all spinning, breathing, expanding and contracting. At the core, a suspended, pulsating sphere that seemed to condense not matter, but information, memory, consciousness. Claire took a deep breath, pointing. There is the core, the root, the central pulse. That is what holds everything together. Not just the house, not just the property, everything, the network, the hive. Samuel squinted, trying to make sense of what he saw, while his own vision seemed to distort, as if looking directly at it broke the laws of human perception. It was like trying to see a concept, an idea, a thing that shouldn't have form. And yet, there it was. The sphere pulsed, emitting waves that weren't sound, weren't light, weren't electricity. They were commands, pure frequencies, vibrations that carried will, identity, power, and then they realized beneath the sphere were bodies, rows of them, all black, all curled in the fetal position, connected by wires that ran through their skulls, their spines, their hearts. They were the batteries, the matrices, the fuel. Suddenly, the platform they were standing on shook. A different sound, deeper, denser, filled the space, as if reality itself was rumbling. And then, a voice, not like the ones before. No longer a whisper, no longer a vibration, but a full voice, complete, that filled everything, coming from every direction, from within, from without, from above, from below, from the DNA itself. You shouldn't be here. The words reverberated, tearing, breaking, distorting, and in that exact second, from the center of the sphere, something began to form, something that should never have a name, something that saw them. From the center of the black sphere, matter began to fold in on itself, not like something growing or something forming naturally, but like a mistake, an accident of existence, a glitch in the fabric of reality. It writhed in impossible spasms, creating limbs that appeared and disappeared in the same split second, eyes that blinked into the void and disappeared, mouths that opened only to show they were not meant for speech, but for consumption. Samuel and Claire stepped back, holding on to each other as their brains tried and failed to process this. Because this did not obey the rules of the world. It had no symmetry. It had no limits. It had no name. It was a malformed attempt to take shape. And in the attempt, it failed. Over and over again, every spasm of that being made the floor vibrate. The veins in the walls contract, and a sound, something between a wail and a cosmic roar, reverberated like gravitational waves passing straight through the body without asking for permission. Samuel pressed his hands against his ears, but the sound didn't come through his ears. It was in the synapses, in the blood, in the spinal fluid. Claire held her chest, gasping, fighting against her own body, which seemed to want to disconnect from reality, as if her mind was beginning to delaminate, split into layers, be pulled into it. And then, from the shapeless mass, a part of it emerged that simulated a face. Not just any face, not a generic face. It was Samuel's face, perfect, detailed, exact, his eyes, his mouth, his scars. But there was no expression, there was no life, just a simulation, a crude, distorted copy. And when that mouth opened, it made no sound, just a vacuum, a hole that sucked in the very light. Samuel took a step back, gasping. "They are copying you," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. They want to integrate you into the matrix. Not just you, your essence, your existence, your pattern." It was at that moment that Samuel realized the ramifications of this. It wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about the bodies. It wasn't just about the hijacked consciousnesses. It was about data, mental architecture, spiritual biometrics. Every person who passed through wasn't just absorbed. They were converted into code, into a replicable pattern, into a biological backup, and then it all made sense. The obsession with lineage, with inheritance, with continuity. They didn't just want to live longer, they wanted to be anyone, to be everyone, and at the same time, to be no one. The sound that filled the space grew deeper, denser, more violent. The structures began to shake. Cracks appeared in the walls, as if the creature itself, that shapeless mass, was beginning to collapse under its own weight, but not from weakness, not from defeat. It was a birth, a rebirth. The thing was rearranging its parts, its will, its forms, as if finally it had decided, it will be born. It will assume a body, and it will leave there. And in that instant, the creature's eyes, now formed, now fixed, now conscious, fixed themselves directly on Samuel and Claire. And for the first time, a voice, clear, distinct, full, said, "You do not leave here." The air felt heavier, as if it were made of liquid lead. Each breath required an inhuman effort, as if the oxygen itself was refusing to cooperate with any organism that did not belong to that entity. The creature, or that which was trying to be a creature, was no longer a shapeless mass. Its contours were solidifying, and although it remained grotesque, impossible, contradictory to geometry and biology, there was now an intention, a decision, a will. Samuel could see this not through his eyes, but through the way the space around him was distorted, as if the world was rewriting itself around him. The floor began to vibrate, metal plates retracting, revealing secondary structures, mechanical arms, cables, claws, needles and syringes filled with black fluids that dripped like oil mixed with blood. It was an assembly line, a factory, a production line of bodies. The claws moved quickly, assembling skeletons, fitting bones together, tensing synthetic muscles, connecting fake veins to organic circuits. Samuel and Claire watched in terror as a mold of Samuel himself, perfect, symmetrical like a biological imprint, began to form in the center. "They don't want you anymore. They want to be you," Claire whispered, her throat tight, holding his arm as if holding on to the last thread before the abyss. In the center of the room, the sphere that had once seemed like a core was now shaking violently, cracking, releasing tendrils of black light that oozed like an unnatural liquid. And beneath it, Samuel noticed a panel, small, hidden, embedded in the veins and structures. It was as if it were not part of the creature, but rather a control, a switch, a flaw, a loophole that someone, at some point, had hidden. Claire stared straight at it, her eyes wide. That's it, the core, the master code. Sam, if you turn that off, everything, absolutely everything, collapses. But time was not on their side. The claws began to turn, no longer to build, but to capture. One reached for Claire, another for Samuel himself, who rolled on the ground, dodging by inches, a blade that came down with enough speed to snap a pole in half. "Run!" he screamed, pulling Claire, who stumbled, falling sideways, but getting up with the momentum of absolute terror. The walls pulsed, the pipes vibrated, the internal sirens went off, not like ordinary alarms, but like screams. Screams of something that knew it was about to be killed. Samuel ran to the panel, stumbling, tearing his arm on. A metal beam, feeling the hot blood running down, mixing with that black liquid that seemed to rise from the floor. He looked at the controls. There were no buttons, no keys, nothing that resembled human technology, just a circle, a spiral, and a hand, a mold of a hand. He looked at Claire, who screamed, "Do it, Sam, now!" And without thinking, without knowing if that would bring salvation or damnation, Samuel took a deep breath and fitted his hand into the mold. At that exact second, the creature screamed. Not a scream of pain, not a scream of rage, but a scream of absolute terror. The touch of Samuel's hand against that mold was like triggering not a mechanism, but an ancient contract buried in the very fabric of reality. An impossible sound rippled through the space. It vibrated not in the air, but in the very fabric of the world. A rumble that seemed to reverberate in the bones, in the blood, in the empty space between the cells, as if an invisible hand had pulled a string that kept everything in balance. The creature, or what was trying to be one, let out a scream that could not be translated. It was not pain, it was not fear, it was collapse, a scream so absolute, so primal, that it made the walls crack, the cables come loose, and the capsules begin to rupture one by one, releasing the black liquid that ran across the floor like open veins. The structures began to collapse. Metal plates came loose, biotechnological arms shook convulsively before breaking in half. The mold of Samuel's body, which was almost finished, collapsed, melting into a grayish liquid that smoked like acid when it touched the floor. But it wasn't just the room. It wasn't just the core. It was everything. The mansion itself, up there, was shaking. The entire system, a network much larger than that property, seemed to shudder, as if all the instances connected to that core were feeling the end. From above, the screams of investors, of observers, mixed with explosions, with shattering glass, with breaking beams. Claire grabbed Samuel by the shoulders, pulling him along as chunks of the ceiling collapsed. Sparks flew, and biological fluids, or something else, dribbled down the walls. "Let's go! Let's go now!" she screamed, her eyes wide, a mix of absolute terror and a hope so fragile it felt like it was about to shatter. Samuel ran, stumbling, his lungs burning, as the platform leading to the surface began to break apart, pieces falling away, falling into the abyss that now seemed bottomless. Because somehow that place, that thing, had no limit. It had no floor. It had no end. It was a space within a space, a mistake in the map of reality. The creature, now reduced to a shapeless mass, trembled, convulsed, trying desperately to rebuild itself. But it was too late. Cracks were spreading throughout its entire length. From within it, black lights flashed, accompanied by screams that did not come from a single voice, but from many, thousands, millions, lives, consciousnesses, fragments of people trapped, transformed into data, into codes, into energy. And, in the next instant, a gigantic crack cut through the ceiling of the chamber, dropping an enormous beam which crossed the center of the creature, breaking it. And with it, a flash, not white, not black, without color, without light, without definition. A flash that did not illuminate, but extinguished, as if it were the sound of oblivion. Samuel and Claire ran, leaping over debris, dodging mechanical arms that flailed wildly until they reached an opening in the left corner, a crevice that hadn't been there before, probably made by the explosions and collapses. As they passed through, they found a narrow metal staircase that creaked upward, shaking with each step. And as they climbed, the sound of the collapse behind them sounded like an entire world falling apart. But Samuel knew, deep down, he knew that this wasn't just the end of this creature, or this family, or this house. It was the end of an era, the end of a network, a rupture, a gaping chasm that could either be salvation or the harbinger of something much, much greater. Each step of that staircase seemed about to give way, groaning under the weight of its own collapse, as if the universe were bending to expel that place from its very existence. The light above was pale, intermittent, filtered through cracks and crevices of the mansion that trembled, groaned, sobbed, like a wounded animal on the verge of death. Samuel and Claire climbed without looking back, because they knew there was no more behind. There was no more below. What was left there was dying, or at least trying to die. Because, as the core collapsed, as the creature convulsed in its last spasms, a disturbing certainty grew in Samuel. Not everything that dies stays dead. When they stepped through an opening at the top, they found themselves in the side courtyard of the now unrecognizable mansion. Windows were exploding, flames were rising, but they were no ordinary flames. They were blue flames that seemed to burn through the very fabric of reality, distorting the air, tearing apart colors, creating shadows that shouldn't exist. In the garden, the servants, those who had once been mentally kidnapped, were on their knees, coughing, crying, clutching their heads as if an invisible anchor had finally broken. But not all of them were alive. Some had been left incomplete, empty of mind, empty of soul, like broken dolls, like shells without a script. In the distance, the structure of the mansion began to give way. The north tower collapsed first, taking part of the facade with it, and then the entire roof sank, sucked into its own foundation, as if the ground had opened its mouth and swallowed it. And then, silence. A silence so absolute that it seemed unnatural. Samuel and Claire stood still, breathing as if reborn, staring at the smoking rubble. Their legs feeling weak, the smell of iron, of burning flesh, of rotting wood still filled the air, but above all, there was something else. The smell of end. The smell of something that should have been destroyed, but that, deep down maybe, had not been completely. And then, through the ashes, a sound, a beeping, faint, intermittent. Samuel turned toward it and saw a terminal, almost buried, cracked, burned but active. On the screen, a single word flashed repeatedly like a heartbeat. Upload. Claire held his hand, squeezing it, shaking. Sam, no, it can't be at this, no. Her voice cracked, but the screen didn't. It kept going, tireless, cold, alive. Upload, upload, upload. And, in the bottom corner, a detail that chilled Samuel to his core. Active connections, 17,482. Locations, global. Because that was never about that house. It was never about that family. That is a system, an organism, a network, and the network still breathes. The silence was broken only by Claire, who held Samuel's face tightly, looking into his eyes and whispered, "We didn't win, Sam. We just opened the door." And at the bottom of the screen, as the letters continued to flash, as the beeping continued, a final line of code appeared, as if someone or something on the other side was watching, waiting, smiling, and it read, "Inheritance confirmed, process started, see you soon." And the screen went blank. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content. See you later.